757.org will work. The Booty Snatch, I think, is technically the name of what he called the skill crane game. One half of it is on the network. One half of it you can put a quarter in and play. The prizes are basically the same on both sides. The hiccup, of course, is if you're in a talk and you're playing the skill crane game and you win, the prize doesn't come through the browser. So you actually have to go next door and get it. And so then the catch is you have to be quicker than somebody who's standing there and goes, ooh, free prize. It may be karma for taking a DVD. Anyway, so I think that's about it on the announcement front. We're gonna introduce Alonica here. She's gonna give her talk, and after this is gonna be lunch break. So we're starting a little bit late, so she's gonna run a little bit long, and then after that will be an hour break for lunch. So feel free to go get some sustenance. We understood the comments from last year where I don't think we had a lunch break, so this year you can go out and get food and not miss anything. So. Anyway, Alonica, who has a book coming out in April, is going to be talking today about Kryptos. I assume most people in this room here are familiar with that puzzle and what's interesting about it, and that's why you're here. And if you don't, I'm sure she'll bring you up to speed on it. It sounds very, very interesting. Again, the Kryptos puzzle, as I understand it, has been this challenge that's existed for some time, and it was an interactive, problem-solving exercise. People had to work through it. It wasn't something that happened overnight. So I encourage you to make this conversation interactive, learn what you can, and have a good time. So, there you
go. Hi, thank you all for coming. I need to go. I'm going to tell a little bit of the story about how I got involved with the whole cryptography thing and how I even got involved with the hacker scene. My day job is that I'm a professional game developer. I make online multiplayer games at play.net. And, and I speak on games at various conferences. And I was speaking at a convention called DragonCon, which is down in Atlanta. Has anybody here been to DragonCon? Okay. So you know that they've got different tracks. There's like a Star Trek track and a Star Wars track and a Buffy the Vampire Slayer track. And one of the tracks is called the Electronic Frontiers track, and that's where 2,600 folks will come in and they'll talk about computer security, and also they'll have some talks on massively multiplayer games. And so I would come in and talk. And I was speaking at DragonCon, and because I was a speaker and the SE 2,600 folks were speakers, and we kind of got to know each other that way, have a beer at the end of the day. And they told me about this code that had been released at the Freaknik 3 convention. It was a challenge to the folks at the convention, but it had been a year and no one had cracked it yet. And so I'm like, okay, yeah, thanks. And I took the flyers and went home. And then after DragonCon, I was like really sick one weekend or something. And I got really bored, and I decided to take a look at this code. And I just got obsessed with it. And I didn't do anything else. I was completely antisocial for a while, but I finally cracked the code. And I won the prize, which was a free trip to a HackerCon and free drinks and T-shirts and all that stuff. And then I went around cracking a bunch of other codes. And I actually cracked so many of these codes that at one of the cons, which is the Atlanta Con, they had a cipher there on a sheet of paper. And when they released the cipher at Atlanta Con, at the bottom of the cipher it said, "Note, past puzzle crackers are ineligible for prizes associated with solving the Atlanta Con puzzle. Give someone else a chance, Ilanka." And so that's kind of how I got into this whole code thing. So I'm going to be talking about this really famous sculpture at the center of CIA headquarters called Kryptos. And I'm going to be talking about other sculptures that were made by the same artist, a man named James Sanborn. And one of the encrypted sculptures he made was something called the Cyrillic projector, which is currently at the University of North Carolina at Charlotte. And that had been uncracked for about 10 years. And then I kind of cat herded a huge international team, and we cracked that cipher. And I'll talk about that whole process, about how we did it. Then I'm going to talk about what is known. I'll tell you what the first 3 parts of Kryptos say, and I'll tell you what we know about the 4th part, so if anyone wants to take a shot at it. And we also have a mailing list on Yahoo Groups, and anyone here is more than welcome to join the mailing list. I want lots and lots of different viewpoints in there. And I'll also talk about how Kryptos is sort of creeping into pop culture right now, especially because it's being associated with a book called The Da Vinci Code by a guy named Dan Brown. And in the artwork of the book jacket, at least of the American version of the book, Dan Brown actually hid several puzzles within the artwork. There's actually 5 different puzzles in this book. And 2 of the puzzles refer to Kryptos, and I'll be telling you a little bit more about those too. Brown has said that the reason for the puzzles in the book are they're giving clues towards the theme of his next novel, which is supposed to be called The Solomon Key. It's going to take place here in the Washington, D.C. area. It's going to be about the secret society of the Freemasons. So I already told you some of this. General manager of online community. I've been doing games for a long, long time. I've also been involved with computers forever. My dad was involved with computers back in the early days when they were, the huge room-sized mainframes where if the computer crashed, you need to reboot it by re-entering the operating system by hand in binary. And he would take me into work with him, and I'd be playing with key punch machines. I was a little kid because the chad that falls out of them, you get these huge handfuls of confetti at the bottom of the key punch machines, and I enjoyed playing those. I've been a speaker at several different conventions. I think before this, I was speaking at a conference in California called the Hackers Conference, and also at the National Security Agency, the Cryptologic History Symposium. So I cracked a bunch of codes in the hacker scene. Something else I did is after September 11th, since a bunch of my customers were affected in New York, Washington, D.C. here, and many of my customers wanted to know what was the status of other customers that were in those areas. And so I put together a huge database, a crisis center at my company, and we had all these reports streaming in. And as part of that, one of my customers did something pretty scuzzy, which is that he decided to use September 11th as an opportunity to declare himself dead, and then was going around online pretending to be his own widow and really traumatizing a lot of people. And I was the one that figured that out and tracked him down. And I got him eventually to post a public confession about what he'd done and a public apology to the community. And there's various newspaper articles about that. I can point you at that. And I told you about the Cyrillic projector. And then as part of this, when I was working on Kryptos, people kept asking me, how famous is Kryptos? I'm like, I don't know. And so I'd go to Google and I type famous unsolved codes. And I tried to find a list of what were the most famous unsolved codes in the world. But there really wasn't such a specific list. So I decided to make one. It was just a little one-page thing on my website. And it just became hugely popular. I've gotten the Ilanka.com site and something like over 1.4 million page views over the last couple of years. It's just a hugely popular site. And on my list of famous unsolved codes, I put Kryptos at number 5. The number 1 code is something called the Beale ciphers. All right. So this is the Freaknik 3 code that kind of started my whole crypto odyssey here. And I won't go into the details of how it is put together, but basically it's sort of like an onion. There's several different sections. There's some binary in there. There's some decimal. There's some PGP and UU encoding. And I just kind of kept peeling at it until I got all the way in. And then I wrote this tutorial about how I had solved it. This is online. And I wrote it in a very kind of a tongue-in-cheek cyberpunk fashion. So if you like that kind of reading, it's kind of a fun read. And through the Freaknik 3 code is how I first heard about the crypto sculpture. It was in the Freaknik 3 code, there were various dead ends, like, okay, to solve the next part, go and solve this next. And there was a link to the CIA website. And so that's where I first heard about Kryptos. And Kryptos had been big in the news in 1999 because that was when the first 3 parts were publicly solved. And I'm like, okay, haha, dead end. And I didn't really work on Kryptos, but I kind of kept it in the back of my mind. And then September 11th happened, and I have a cousin who works here in D.C. He gives talks at the Pentagon every so often. And he actually had a really close call on the morning of September 11th. He was running late for a meeting because he was having printer problems. And then he got the printer problems resolved, and he was on his way, and he checked his cell phone. And his cell phone actually crashed because of all the messages from people saying a plane just hit the Pentagon, don't go. And the plane hit right where he was supposed to be. So some of the people he was supposed to brief were killed. And so after September 11th, I came here to Washington, D.C. to see my cousin and hug him and tell him I was glad he was okay, and we went to the memorial at the Pentagon. And then afterwards, we're kind of driving around D.C., and he says, hey, as long as you're here in D.C., is there anything else you want to see? I mean, there's all these tourist attractions. And I was thinking, hey, yeah, there's the Kryptos sculpture. I'd like to go see Kryptos. And he's like, okay, well, where is it? And I said, well, I think it's in the courtyard at CIA. And he says, okay, CIA is at Langley. Where? And I don't know. And so I went searching around, and I kind of ran into a roadblock, which is that there's no street address for CIA headquarters. I mean, you can't just go to MapQuest and type directions to CIA and figure out where it is. And I mean, I really looked, and there was just nothing that said where CIA was. And so what I did, and you got to remember this is way before Google Earth and all that, is I downloaded a bunch of satellite reconnaissance pictures of the Langley, Virginia area. And I sort of knew what the building looked like because I'd seen like the Tom Clancy movies where it says like overhead view CIA. And so I went looking around until I found the outline of the building. And so that's how we found CIA. And we were going to go, drive over to CIA and kind of like, take the exit and, just drive past the service road. But the entrance we chose, there's no service road. You take the exit and you're right there at CIA. There's this huge gate, there's barbed wire, and there's the guard shack with all these big guys with guns that are pouring out asking very reasonable questions. Who are you and why are you here? And I said, hey, I'm here to see Kryptos. And they're like, oh, sorry, Kryptos, you can't get in. It's official business only. And I was saying, okay, can I talk my way into CIA headquarters? And so I was saying, can I, get like a special invitation like for my congressman, or is there a public tour day? And I tried all the different things I could think of, and they were all very firm, and they said, nope, sorry, the only people that can come into CIA are those with official business. And I tried, and they were like, nope, official business. And they were very polite, but they were very firm, and they did have guns. And so I finally, kind of gave up on that, but I was saying, okay, official business, official business. So to give you a little more background on Kryptos, it was commissioned in 1988, and then it was installed and dedicated formally dedicated at the CIA in 1990. The artist who made it was a man named James Sanborn. He was born in 1945 here in Washington, D.C., and he was taught about code systems by a man named Ed Scheidt, who was the chairman of the CIA Cryptographic Center. And the reason I put CIA Cryptographic Center there in quotes is because I have never found any record of a CIA Cryptographic Center or any chairman of a CIA Cryptographic Center before Ed Scheidt or after Ed Scheidt. But at the time that the articles came out, they said Ed Scheidt, chairman of the CIA Cryptographic Center. Yeah. Now, as I said, it was difficult to get in to see the sculpture because of the whole official business thing, and the agency was difficult to find, but I was determined. And I was thinking about this official thing. And then also one of the tracks after September 11th I was doing is I was thinking, hey, I've cracked all these codes, I have all this cryptographic experience. Maybe there's some way that I can kind of help out with the war effort. Sort of like there was a thing in World War II called Bletchley Park that was involved with the cracking of the Enigma ciphers. And they needed lots of people to work on the Enigma system, and they didn't have enough. So what they were doing in England then is they were putting like really hard puzzles in the newspapers, saying, if you can solve this puzzle, we may have a job for you. And so they were hiring people from all different walks of life for this project. And I was thinking, maybe there's something like that here in the States. So I called up my local FBI in St. Louis, and I said, hey, I've got all this crypto experience, can I help? And they said no. So I called back the next week, and I said, hey, I've got all this crypto experience, can I help? And they said, and I kept calling back. I was really persistent. And finally, I got an agent who said, well, what is it that you know about? And I started listing off all the different kinds of cryptography, all the different cryptographic systems I'd run across. And one of the ones that I mentioned was called steganography. And he said, hey, we've been hearing rumors that Al-Qaeda may have been using steganography as a way of planning the September 11th attack. Now, we're here in the St. Louis field office, and we're sure there's big brains in Washington, D.C. that know all about steganography, but we don't really have a cryptographic mission here in St. Louis. Could you maybe put together a talk about what steganography is and then come and kind of educate us on it? And what they were doing was what I thought was really smart was after September 11th, they were really working on increasing the communication between all the different agencies. So every couple months, they'd have a task force meeting, and there'd be representatives there from the FBI and the Secret Service and the Assistant Attorney General and Customs and Postal Inspectors and everybody, and they'd all kind of come and kind of talk about the different projects that they were all working on. And they were also realizing that people in the private sector sometimes knew more than the people that were in the government agencies. So they were inviting people from the private sector. And that's how I kind of got in there. They said, come in and give a little talk about steganography. So I think they thought I was going to do this like a little 10-minute talk about steganography. What I did is I put together this 70-slide PowerPoint presentation, and I went into all the stuff about how steganography works and what kind of codes that I thought Al-Qaeda was using. I don't believe Al-Qaeda was using steganography. I think that was a bunch of rumors, and I traced down where the rumors came from. Like, for example, a bust that was done in Italy and Milan at a Via Quaranta mosque. And they busted an Al-Qaeda cell there, and when they busted the cell, they also got a bunch of laptop computers with them, and these Al-Qaeda laptop computers had a lot of porn on them. And so the rumors started, well, Al-Qaeda, why would they have porn on their computers? Oh, they must have been hiding secret messages in the porn. I'm like, no, sometimes porn is just porn. But that's kind of how, that was one of the places where some of these rumors started. So I was talking about steganography, and the Al-Qaeda, the codes that they tended to use were really simple. Like if they were talking on a cell phone and they wanted to say FBI, instead of saying FBI, they might say food and beverage industry. So just really, really simple codes they were using. Anyway, so I had this steganography talk, and I gave it to St. Louis Task Force, and then I started getting invited around the country to different universities to also give the talk. And I'm thinking, maybe I can use this talk as the official business that's going to get me into CIA headquarters. So steganography is a way of hiding messages inside of images. And what I did is I downloaded a picture from the CIA website, and I used that as my example in my talk of how to hide something in an image. I hid a message inside a picture I got from the CIA website. And then every time I gave the talk, I would show that the slide of Kryptos, and I would say, and here's how steganography works. By the way, I would love to give this talk at CIA. By the way, I'd love to sit on the rock in front of the sculpture and give a talk. And so every time I gave the talk, I'd say that. And then I got selected as an alternate speaker at DEF CON a few years ago, and it was up in the big roof tent. And so I was doing my steganography talk, and I don't know how many of you have been there, but it's a huge, huge tent. And at the end of the talk, people are coming up and they're thanking me and giving me business cards and whatnot. And then somebody comes up to the podium and they lean really close and they say, "I work at Langley. I think I can get you in." I'm like, "Cool, awesome. I would love to give this talk. I don't want to be paid. I just want time to look at the Kryptos sculpture." And they said, "Okay," and they gave me a first name and a phone number. They wouldn't give me a last name or anything. And so after DEF CON, I'm thinking, okay, was this somebody really working at CIA, or is this just somebody at DEF CON who's like pulling my chain? So I call the number, and they say, "Yeah, we'd like you to come at CIA. Will you send us your slides?" And I'm like, "Okay, sure, but you have to prove to me that you work at CIA." And they said, "Well, how are we supposed to prove that?" And I said, "Well, send me an email from an official CIA address." And they said, "Well, I don't have an email at an official CIA address." And I said, "Well, get an email at an official CIA address." And it took a while, but they got one, and it came from .ucia.gov, so that's unclassified CIA.gov. And then I wrote back to the email and made sure, so we had two-way communication. I knew it wasn't just a spoofed address. And they said, "We want you to come speak." And I'm like, "Great, I don't want to be paid. I just want time to look at Kryptos." And they said, "Okay, how much do you want to be paid?" I'm like, "I don't want to be paid. I just want to look at Kryptos." And we went back and forth on this. And I said, "Really, anything you offer, I'm going to say yes." And they said, "Well, how much do you want?" I'm like, "I reimburse my airfare. But really, anything you offer, I'm going to say yes." We went back and forth, and finally they said, "Okay, we want you to speak. You're going to speak on this day, and we're going to pay you $2,500. I'm like, "Okay, yes." So I got into CIA. I got paid really well, and I got my time to look at Kryptos. And while I was there, they wouldn't let me take any pictures of the sculpture, but I was allowed to take some rubbings of it. And so each one of these was done on an 8.5 by 11-inch piece of paper, to give you kind of idea of scale. And after I got back to St. Louis, I was saying, "Wow, these rubbings are really cool. It's a nice souvenir. But now what do I do?" And I thought, maybe somebody out there is working on Kryptos. Someone else might be interested in these rubbings. So I made a little one-page thing on my website saying, "Hey, this is Ilanka's trip to CIA, and here are the rubbings I got, and here's a little more information on Kryptos." There was like 5 sites on Kryptos at the time. And so I thought, okay, that's nice. And somebody can Google it or use whatever the search engines are. And then I started getting this weird emails from all over the world. And I found out there was a lot of people out there that were working on Kryptos. And they would write letters to me and they would say, "I've solved part 4. And I'm like, "Cool, tell me what it says. I'll put it on my website." And they said, "I've solved it. It's my home address. It's proof that the government is watching me." I'm like, "Okay, can you show me how you got that particular solution?" And I was corresponding with a lot of people. I would say the majority of the people that wrote to me were schizophrenic. And I've got some really creative letters that were written to me. I've actually got a little file of some of the more interesting ones, like that part 4 of Kryptos proves that there's a relationship between Angkor Wat and Mars. But some of the people who wrote to me were real researchers, and they had questions about Kryptos. Where is this, and who made it, and what else has this person made? And I'm a helpful kind of person, so every time they would write to me with one of these questions, I would try and figure out the answer. And a question that they asked me quite often was, what else has this artist, James Sanborn, done? So I'm like, okay, there should be a list out there of something that James Sanborn has done. So I checked the internet. There's really no such list. So I call up Sanborn's agent, and I say, "Hey, can I have a list of everything Sanborn's ever done?" And they said, "There's no such list." And I'm like, "Well, someone must have a list." They said, no, he's done far too much work. It would be impossible to make a list of everything Sanborn's ever done." So I'm like, okay, I'll make a list of everything Sanborn's ever done. So I started another section of my webpage, and I started researching all of Sanborn's works all over the world. And at one point, I actually got a phone call from Sanborn, who's like, "Who are you, and why do you have a webpage about me?" And I'm like, "Hey, I'm really glad to be talking to you." And so now I actually talk to him on a regular basis. And so I'm getting a little bit ahead of myself here. This is part 4. This is the bottom of the ciphertext part of the Kryptos sculpture. It's 97 or 98 characters. The reason we say "or" is because of that question mark at the very beginning of it. The last part of part 3 ends with a question. So we don't know if that question mark is part of part 3 or if it's part of part 4. The 97 and 98 numbers are interesting because 97 is a prime number and 98 can be factored by all kinds of stuff. So it could be significant depending on which number it is. The rows are also very regular. They're the exact same number of characters in those bottom 3 rows, whereas most of the other rows are irregular. Question?
When you're able to talk to Mr. Sanborn, and as you were not able to take pictures of Kryptos itself, did you do rubbings for the whole thing, or was he able to, do you know what all of the ciphertext is?
The question is, do I know what all of the ciphertext is? And yes. There's also a list of the ciphertext on the CI website, though that site is actually wrong. There's actually mistakes there, and I've written to them, but they still haven't fixed them. But I do have the exact, accurate transcript of the ciphertext that's on my website. Did that answer? Oh, okay. So Kryptos is made of 4 panels. 2 of the panels are what's called a visionaire table that's named after a cryptographer named Blaise de Vigenère, who's actually misnamed for a type of polyalphabetic cryptographic system. It was actually designed by some other Italians, and he designed a harder system, and then he got named for the easier system. It's all really complicated, but we just call it visionaire at this point. And a keyword builds a cipher alphabet. I'll explain a little bit about that. And the first keyword is Kryptos. Now, the first person to publicly solve it was a man named Jim Galogli from California. He's a computer scientist. And he did this in 1999, and he got international media attention when he did it. And then after he'd announced it, then the CIA came forward, and we said, okay, well, we have someone who solved it last year, a guy named David Stein, and he did it on his own time, kind of working on weekends and during his lunch hour. And at that point, the NSA came forward and said, well, we have 3 people who've solved it, but we're not going to tell you who, we're not going to tell you when, which is a very NSA thing to do. I mean, the joke, what does NSA stand for? No such agency. Now, when I gave this talk at the NSA Cryptologic History Symposium a couple months ago, somebody came up to me and they handed me a newspaper article. So I actually have an update on this, is that I do know the names of a couple people that solved it. And it was actually in 1992. And what happened was the CIA's deputy director, this is a brand new slide here, the CIA's deputy director, Admiral William, I think Studeman, if I'm pronouncing that incorrectly, someone tell me, but he said to NSA, okay, you guys are so hot, let's see how hot you are. And so the Vice Admiral Mike McConnell, he went to the NSA and they had a ceremony and he said, okay, let's put together a team and do this. So they put together a 4-person team and they ran computer attacks on it for about 2 months. They solved the first 3 parts pretty quickly, and then they kept working on it. They did not solve K4, and they finally gave up on it in early 1993, and that's when they formally presented what they'd found to CIA. So some people come on, the NSA must have solved it. No, the NSA has not solved K4. They don't know either. And when I gave the talk, it was clear that they didn't know because they were as curious as everybody else about what K4 says. Right. This is the sculptor who made Kryptos, a man named James Sanborn. And he's got a really interesting background. He studied architecture. His dad was the director of exhibitions at the Library of Congress for about 25 years. He's got a degree in social anthropology and a degree in sculpture. He was a teacher at, I think, Echo Park. And there was no public list of his works until I started making one. Now, as I was doing this research on other sculptures that Sanborn had done, I found out that after he'd made Kryptos, he'd made another piece, which he called the Untitled Kryptos piece, which he sold to a private collector. It passed through various hands, but I found the current location of it, which is in the home of a .com millionaire who's living in Southern California. And when I was in California for a convention called E3, I called up this, I called the caretaker of his home, and I said, hey, I'm Ilanka, I do a lot of Kryptos research. Can I come and take a look at your garden? And went through a couple steps, but they said sure, and we were able to go in and take some pictures of it. Now, this Untitled piece, there's 2 versions of it that are out there. One is this version that's in this guy's garden. This is the original one. And then there's another version, which is about 20% larger, which is called Antipodes, which is at the Hirshhorn Museum over on the Mall. And you can see that it's got 2 halves, and it doesn't look exactly like Kryptos, but in those 2 halves, one side has got all the text from Kryptos repeated, though there's a few slight differences. The other side is all encrypted Russian text. So here's some close-ups of it, and you can see that we've got the Cyrillic text on the one side, and on the other side we have the Latin alphabet. Okay. Now the Russian text is repeated on another sculpture of Sanborn's, which is called the Cyrillic projector. This is the one at the University of North Carolina in Charlotte. And this was originally used for Sanborn's gallery shows in the early 1990s, and then in 1997 he sold it to the university, and that's where it's been sitting since then. And this is the one that I had a team that cracked. Okay, so the differences between the CIA version of the Kryptos sculpture and the Untitled Kryptos piece. One is that things are in a slightly different order. So you can see here the top part, and I don't know if there's a laser pointer here, but I should be able to do this. Okay, at the top part, you can see you have these nice diagonals. This is part of the visionnaire tableau. And at the bottom, this is where the ciphertext starts. Now, the ciphertext starts here, ENDYAHR. This is actually not the start of part 1 on Kryptos. This is actually the start of part 3. So if you number the sections on Kryptos, 1, 2, 3, 4, the untitled Kryptos piece goes like 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, and then it goes like halfway through 2 and stops. So we don't know why he reorganized things like that. Another big difference between the two sculptures, the tableau is different. On the Kryptos side, there's actually a reference alphabet down the side, and on this piece, there's no reference alphabet. Another is over here. This is towards the bottom of the ciphertext, and right around here, there's these 2 dots. Those 2 dots do not exist anywhere on the regular on the CI version of the Kryptos sculpture. It's got question marks, but it has no other punctuation. So why these dots are there and not on the Kryptos version, we don't know. We don't know if that's a clue. We don't know if that's just because Sanborn was sloppy or what it means. But it's potential that it's some sort of crib to get into the code. There's another picture of Kryptos again. So the dots, if they were on this sculpture, I'm going to say only W, they would be right about here. Right about here. Okay.
And which section is that?
Part 2. Part 2. So so going back to Kryptos, you can see it's made of 4 plates. And on these 2 plates here are the visionnaire tableau, and then these 2 plates are where the ciphertext is. So we have part 1, part 2, part 3, and then part 4 is down here. And the visionnaire tableau, now notice these reference spaces at the top and bottom. Those may be important. We're not sure. And you'll hear me say we don't know a lot, or I don't know, because we don't. But these alphabets along the top and along the side, that's also interesting. If someone studies cryptography, you know, there's several different methods of doing a visionnaire system. The American Cryptogram Association calls some of them Quagmire methods, Quagmire, Quagmire 2, Quagmire 3. And the 2 of the parts of Kryptos are solved with something called the Quagmire 3 system. What's interesting is this is a visionnaire tableau that is not the Quagmire 3 system. This is the Quagmire 2 system. So why does he have Quagmire 3 to solve the code, but Quagmire 2 that's on the sculpture? Quagmire 2 was actually used on the Cyrillic projector, but I'm probably boring everybody to tears. Okay. All right. So how is the visionnaire tableau made? First you make a cipher alphabet based on this, based on a keyword. And let me see if I've got, yeah, we'll play that. So what you do is you take a keyword and then you take all the letters of that word out of the alphabet and you pile them up at the front of the alphabet. And then any letters that aren't used, you put at the end. So you still have 26 letters there, they're just in a different order. And that's a quick and easy way to make a scrambled version of a cipher alphabet. Okay. And then you can take that cipher alphabet and say you're going to use another keyword that's going to go down the left-hand column. And in this case, the second keyword is the word palimpsest. Palimpsest is a word for a scroll that has had one message written on it, and then that message was scraped off, and then another message was written on the same papyrus. So you can sort of see bits and pieces of the original message looking through. So now using those 2 keywords, we have this block at the right-hand side here, and this is the visionnaire tableau that's used to encrypt or decrypt a particular message. Okay. All right. So part 1 of Kryptos starts up here, EMUFP, and it's these top 2 lines. All right. And the way it works is that you take the EMUFPHZ, and you have your tableau with Kryptos, palimpsest coming down the column here. And then EMUFP, you put E on one line, M, U, F, P. So then from the E, you go up and you get a B. M becomes an E, U becomes a T. So EMUFPHZ becomes BETWEEN, between. Okay. And you keep doing that all the way through. That's the ciphertext for part 1. Using the keywords of Kryptos and palimpsest, comes out to say, between subtle shading and the absence of light lies the nuance of illusion. Now it says occlusion there. That is a spelling error that is hard-coded or hard-carved right into the sculpture. Now I've asked Sanborn, and by the way, there's no such word as occlusion. It's a mistake in there. And I've asked Sanborn, I said, was this just a screw-up? And was it making codes is really complicated. It's very easy to make a typo. And he says, no, it was deliberate. but it's not what it is that's so important, it's where it is. It's the orientation or the positioning. No idea what that means. Okay. Part 2 starts here at line 3, goes all the way down to the bottom of the plate here. It uses the same system. So here we have the ciphertext for part 2. It uses, again, a Quagmire 3 system, but this time instead of Kryptos and palimpsest, it uses the keys of Kryptos and abscissa. Abscissa is a mathematical term, meaning the x-coordinate on a graph. And it says, it was totally invisible. How's that possible? They used the Earth's magnetic field, X. The information was gathered and transmitted underground to an unknown location, X. Does Langley know about this? They should. It's buried out there somewhere, X. Who knows the exact location? Only WW. This was his last message, X. 38 degrees, 57 minutes, 6.5 seconds north, 77 degrees, 8 minutes, 44 seconds west, ID by rows, or possibly ID by row S. We don't know, because when we get this, it's all mashed together, and then we have to kind of put in the word spaces and the punctuation at our best guess. So we have those 4 X's there. We don't know what those mean. The ID by rows, we don't know what that means. And then we have the latitude and longitude. Now, anybody here who's played with a GPS and has done any geocaching, you may know that 6.5 seconds north is a very interesting number, because 1/10 of a second of latitude is a very specific location. It's about 10 feet across. So it points to the general location of CIA headquarters. And some people thought, well, it must point to the actual sculpture. It doesn't point to the sculpture. It points to an area about 150 feet southeast of the sculpture. Now, I was there, I looked, I didn't see anything. We've had some other people at CIA who've gone and looked. There's nothing there. So does that mean that we've miscalculated it? Or does it mean that it's not supposed to point to something, but it's supposed to point a relation to something? Because Sanborn has said that nothing has been done visually with the sculpture and what might be juxtaposed. I don't know what that means, but no, passing along. This is something else. Somebody said that between subtle shading and the absence of light lies the nuance of illusion. We were wondering if maybe it was a line from a poem or an old play or something, but it's an original sentence, and Sanborn says it's an original sentence written by him with carefully chosen wording. Now, one theory on this, we don't know if this is true or not, but someone said maybe it's a cryptic clue for the key in the next part of Kryptos, the word abscissa. Subtle shading is SS, absence, ABS, light. Of course, you got C, and so between subtle shading, SS, and the absence of light lies the new. Maybe it's a clue for the word abscissa. Also, once I gave this talk, and someone came up and pointed out, well, the letters CIA are in that word as well. Again, just lots and lots of speculation here. Now, part 3 starts at the top of the plate here, goes all the way down to about here. Also notice that we have these little letters that are out of alignment, and we don't know what that means either. So here's the ciphertext for part 3. Now, some of you that have played with codes, you may notice something different about the ciphertext right off. It's different from the section like part 1 and part 2. And it's the letter distribution. In part 1 and part 2, it's kind of a very random, lots of Q's and Z's and X's. And here it's lots of E's, lots of T's. So anyone who's done frequency analysis, and that's like the main tool that a cryptanalyst will use, will say, maybe this isn't a polyalphabetic substitution system, maybe this is a transposition system. All the letters are there. It looks like English. It has the right frequency of English. We just need to figure out how to reorder the letters. And exactly, that is exactly it. And this is a method, the original people who did it figured out a mathematical formula, which was going through and counting every 192nd letter. And then I came up with a pencil and paper method, which is that if you take all the letters and you pile them up and you get these nice even rows. And remember that first part that said ID by rows? And I was saying, okay, if you start right here, smack in the middle, you got an S. Now, if you count like down, 1, 2, 3, 4, you get to an L. Count down another 4, you get to an O. You get a W, L, count, you get a Y, S, L, O, W, L, Y, slowly. And if you keep doing that, you get these wonderful clean diagonals, and you can actually zip out the entire message that way. Slowly, desperately slowly, the remaining passage debris that encumbered the lower part of the doorway was removed. With trembling hands, I made a tiny breach in the upper left-hand corner, and then, widening the hole a little, I inserted the candle and peered in. The hot air escaping from the chamber caused the flame to flicker, but presently details of the room within emerged from the mist. X. Can you see anything? Q. Now, some of you probably recognize that right off. This is actually, it's a paraphrased extract from the diary of an archaeologist by the name of Howard Carter on November 26th, 1922, on the day that he discovered King Tut's tomb. So the can you see anything at the end, perhaps that's a crib for solving part 4, because the answer that he gave was yes, wonderful things, or yes, it is wonderful. It depends which version of his book you read. We actually tracked down the original field notes, which are in a library at Oxford University, and took a look at it. And the text is not the same as what was in his notes, and it's not the same as was in his book. So why Sanborn changed it may also mean something. We don't know. Sanborn used that passage in another one of his encrypted sculptures, which is actually, you can see it in a restaurant. It's called the Zola Spy Restaurant. It's next door to the International Spy Museum. And I saw a guy wearing a shirt from the Spy Museum. I don't know if he's still here. But if you go to the restaurant, which is next to the Spy Museum, above one of the tables is this huge pulped document piece. It's a big white plaster piece with letters stamped into it. And when we cracked that one, it came out to the Howard Carter quote, but again, with slightly different wording, like the remains of passage debris was removed, but another one might say the remains of passage debris were removed. And again, we don't know. Did he need to perhaps come up with an exact number of letters for a particular kind of system? We don't know. All right. And again, part 4, can't tell you what it says. We don't know. So why hasn't it been solved yet? Well, it's short, the 97 or 98 characters. Generally, any kind of visionnaire, it used to be called the unbreakable cipher, le chiffre indéchiffrable. But these days, as long as we have enough ciphertext to work with and computers, we can usually crack these things pretty quick. But it has to have enough ciphertext. We need to have enough data that we can kind of look for patterns and do frequency analysis. With just this like 97 or 98 characters, we really can't do that, so it's very difficult. It's also possible the reason it hasn't been solved is because there's something you have to see on CIA grounds. The sculpture was never designed as a public challenge. It was designed as a challenge to the employees at the CIA, and they said with a theme of information gathering. Kryptos, by the way, is a Greek word that means hidden. So that may be, there may be something there, something in the pavement. I mean, Sanborn designed several different pieces around the complex, and I'll show you a slide on that. It's possible we missed something, or we may have been misdirected, like when Sanborn has said it's not what it is, it's where it is. Well, maybe it is what it is. We don't know. And it's also possible that it was screwed up. When I made my list of famous unsolved codes, some of the codes that are famous and unsolved is because whoever made them just made a mistake. For example, there's a book that was written, a guy wrote a book on cryptography, and he had some challenge ciphers at the end of the book, and one of them, you know, the answer was wrong. He doesn't even remember how he created it, so it's now one of the famous unsolved codes. Some people say there's no way it can ever be deciphered, and some people say, oh no, we'll keep trying. All right. Okay, going on to the Cyrillic projector. So this is the Russian side of that untitled Kryptos piece. Let's see, I'm doing on time here. Okay. So I told you it was created in the early 90s. So it was a 3-step process in getting it cracked: transcription, decryption, and translation. And we didn't have any full transcript of it, and then Randall Bollig, who some of you may know because he goes to some of the cons here, he drove through North Carolina, and he stopped off in May 2003, took a bunch of pictures, and he sent them to me, and he said, hey, let's get this thing cracked. And I said, okay. So I put up the picture on my website, and I told our mailing list about it. And then I was waiting to see if anybody would transcribe it, and a couple weeks go by, and no one's transcribed, and I'm like, okay, I guess I'm going to have to make a transcript of the Cyrillic projector. So I spent weeks working on this thing. I mean, imagine I've got a whole bunch of, the little pictures of different sections of this cylindrical sculpture, backwards text, by the way, and they're all spread around me in my living room, and I'm transcribing backwards Russian characters. It was a really pain in the ass process. But I finally come up with this full transcript, and then I present it to the group, and I say, okay, here's a transcript. At which point, 2 other people in the group popped up and said, hey, we've got transcripts too. Like, great, thanks for telling me. But it was also good, because now we had 3 entirely independent transcripts, which we could all compare to make sure that we had one super accurate transcript. And so we did that, and we knew our transcript was good. And, we're busy with other projects as well. We got day jobs, we got other things going on. And so I think after a couple weeks of that, I said, well, tell you what, let's go ahead and make this public. Instead of just keeping it internal to our group, let's put it up on the web. So I made a web page about the Cyrillic projector, and I posted the transcript, and then go on and do other things. And then I'm at work one day at my day job, game company, and I get an email forwarded to me from our customer service department. And what we've got on our game website is we have a way to send anonymous feedback if a customer wants to send a letter. Well, someone had sent anonymous feedback, and the note it said, forward this to Ilanka. It's about the Cyrillic projector. And customer service didn't know what to do about it, and so they forwarded it along to me. And what it said was, I have solved the cryptographic portion of the cipher. It's not terribly difficult. I'm not going to tell you what it says. I'm doing this anonymously because I have a sense of humor. So I'm looking at this and I'm thinking, okay, now did somebody really solve it, or is this just another one of the space alien crazies who's going to tell me, some new theory that he's got about his home address? And I also wasn't sure what to do. Do you make an announcement in a case like this? If someone says they've solved a cipher, but they haven't offered proof of it, what do you do? And so I talked to Jim Galogly, who used to be the head of the American Cryptogram Association. He said this situation's actually come up in the past. And what it is that anonymous solvers do not get credit unless they can prove what it is they did. It's like basic scientific method. Something should not be believed unless it can be duplicated by a third party. You have an independent laboratory and independent cryptography, or independent cryptographer. If it can't be duplicated, it's probably not real. And there's also cases of this where there's been a certain discovery that's been made, like in a government lab, about a certain cryptographic system. They make it, but they don't publish it. And then someone else comes along maybe years later and publishes it, and then the person who did it later gets the credit for the process because they're the ones that made it public. So it's not enough to do something, you have to tell other people what you've done so that other people can duplicate your system. Okay. So, all right, so we've got the transcript up, and I've got this weird anonymous message, and couldn't figure out where it was from because our anonymous feedback form is really an anonymous feedback form. And then a couple months later, I'm reading my weblogs, seeing who's linking to my site, and I see this really interesting URL. And it's an Earthlink site, and it says cpsolution.htm. I'm like, wow, what an intriguing URL. So I go ahead and I follow that one back, and I see this one page here. And it's got a link to my site, and it's Russian, and it looks a lot like a Russian Visioneer table. And so I still don't know if this is something real or not, and I told the group about it, and then I went back to work. And it was a Friday, and that evening I decided to play with it. And I had a spreadsheet that was done by an Italian named Ferdinando Stelle for the Kryptos sculpture, and I modified it and did some macros to make it work with Russian. And I started getting some Russian text coming out of the Cyrillic projector, and it was all kind of mushed together, and it had spelling errors and stuff. And when we found this webpage, CP Solution, we went and we could figure out who made it, because we saw the address in there, and we tracked down the guy. It was a guy in North Carolina named Frank Core. And we said, congratulations, you seem to have come up with something on the Cyrillic projector. He says, yeah, I've done this part, and I get this kind of mush of Russian text, but I still don't know what it says. I don't speak Russian, and it's all kind of mashed together. So now the race was on who was going to come up with the first actual English translation of what the Cyrillic projector said. So this is what I came up with. So this is the actual, does anybody here speak Russian, by the way? No? Okay. So this is all mushed together Russian text. And this is not what it says, but this is an English example of the problem. This sentence might be easily understandable to a native English speaker, but someone not familiar with English would have a great deal of trouble reading or translating it. Plus the fact that there isn't any punctuation isn't any help either. Okay. So this was kind of what we were dealing with. So long story short, Saturday, I'm going through IRC. I'm trying to find someone who speaks Russian. Finally find someone who's a friend of my father. I'm helping someone else move boxes in an apartment. I'm talking on the cell phone. Long, horrible story. But anyway, by the end of the day, I put down my last box and I said, I got to go write press releases. So we came up with the actual formal translation. This is the actual word breaks of the Russian. And I won't read this whole thing to you, but what the Cyrillic projector came out to be was 2 different passages of Russian text. And one of them was instructions to Secret Service agents about how to develop a source. And they said that you want to have a source that you can psychologically control. And because that way, when you need information from that source, you can weave this psychological net around them and pull the net tight. Because if you can psychologically control a source, then you know that you can trust the information that you're getting from that source. So it's all kind of chilling information. I love the sentence at the end that says, however, the methods and behavioral techniques that are needed to attain this goal are radically contrary to the ethics and morality of society in the field of interpersonal relations. I'm like, yeah, you think? Okay. So now part 2 was a completely different text. This was an extract from a classified KGB memo about a Soviet dissident called Sakharov, who was going to be speaking at a conference called the Pugwash Conference, and concerns that the KGB had that his comments were going to be used by the Americans for an anti-Soviet agenda. Now, I say classified KGB memo. How do I know that it was a classified KGB memo? Well, we found the document, okay? And this is the actual source that it came from. Now, the way that I found this was actually kind of interesting. While I was working on compiling a list of everything that Sanborn had ever done, and I was writing to museums all over the country, and I wrote to the Smithsonian, and I said, send me everything you've got on Sanborn. So I get this big, thick envelope with a whole bunch of folders of information on Sanborn. And, you know, he's got this piece, and here's correspondence, and here's a classified KGB document. And there was a classified KGB document that was stuffed into this folder that I got from the Smithsonian. And there was this document, which was the source document for the Cyrillic projector. My guess is the reason it was there is because he was trying to sell the projector at some point, and with the projector he was including the source document. But it was still a very strange experience for me to find this document when I got the envelope from the Smithsonian. All right? And we know, again, classified, it says secretno, secret. All right. So we did the press release, and all hell kind of broke loose, and the announcement went up on Slashdot, and that was, like, I read my web logs, and I kind of look at the number of people visiting per hour, so, you know, 5, 8, 17, 9,037, boom, you know, that's Slashdot hitting my site, but my site stayed up. I was very proud of that. I had something like 30,000 visitors over the course of 24 hours. And I'm sure this audience knows that Slashdot can be very irreverent in terms of discussing things, very high energy. And I really love some of the joke solutions. Say, no, that's not what the Cyrillic projector says. Here's what it really says is, send more vodka. And then someone else says, no, that's not what it says. What it really says is, keep information away from moose and squirrel. All right. So we went back and we continued doing research on the projector, and we were looking at the spelling errors that were in the various Russian words and comparing those to the spelling errors that were on the projector. We wanted to see, did we screw up in our transcript, or was this something that was actually, again, hard-coded or carved into the sculpture, and it was actually in the sculpture. And so the question now is, do these typos have anything to do with the typos that are on the Kryptos sculpture in CIA? Some days I think yes, some days I think no. I'm kind of more on the no side today. I think these were just errors, because I knew from making the transcript it's very, very easy to make mistakes. I'm not a native Russian speaker. Some of the letters say, you know, really, really tiny things, like there's like a sh character and then a sh character, where all you have is this little tail that comes off the bottom corner. And some of the typos were like that, letters that were just very similar, and somebody probably just made a mistake. All right. So again, here's the Kryptos sculpture. All right, so latitude and longitude. This is actually the picture of CIA that I used to find the complex when I was first looking for it back in 2001. And so on the right-hand side here, this is the old headquarters building of CIA, and this is the new headquarters building that they commissioned. Sorry?
They don't like it when you say old. It's original.
Original. I'll do my best there. Okay, so we have the original headquarters building. And they commissioned the new headquarters building, and that's when they kind of put the word out to the general art community and said, we want art and sculptures to go around the building. And Sanborn had been trying for a long time to get a big public art contract, because that's kind of, he has these two sides of his career. He's got the public art side, and he's got the gallery side. And in the art world, the gallery side that's the side with credibility and prestige, and the public art side, it's kind of something you do to make money so that you can continue doing the gallery side. So he wanted to get this big government contract, which he did. He actually didn't make a whole lot of money off of it, but he made several pieces, and some were in this courtyard. This white building in the middle, by the way, this is the cafeteria. And so Sanborn designed this courtyard. So again, here we have the cafeteria, and this is the new headquarters building. And you can't see them in this picture, but there's a bunch of windows along this side of the cafeteria, so that as employees are sitting here, they can look out to the courtyard. And here's the Kryptos sculpture, which is up here. So Sanborn designed this sculpture. He designed this entire semicircular area. There's a duck pond right there. He also designed some pieces over here. This is the entrance going into the new headquarters building. I like this. You can see like the shadows of lampposts. There's actually a shadow of a person you can see walking in to CIA at the moment. And he designed several large granite slabs here. Now, this was the closest picture we had for a while of, from this particular angle, and then Windows Live went up, and so I got a bunch of pictures from there as well. So again, here's the Kryptos sculpture, and you can see these pieces that Sanborn made here. There's a slab there, one here, and one here. It's also interesting that we have this kind of line here, which is the same as the line of the slabs that he put over here by the duck pond, and Sanborn has said that that's deliberate, that those two parallel lines are there. So we think that the latitude and longitude points to right about here. And now again, we've gone and we've looked and we haven't found anything, but it's possible, like if there's a line there and this spot, maybe we need to go find, maybe we need to go look something there. Maybe he buried something. Also, you got to think that it's not just dirt all the way down. There's underground levels to CIA, so there's like office space under there, so that might have something to do with it. It's also possible that maybe there's some sort of a polygon, like if you take Kryptos and then maybe this piece and make those like a rectangle, and then this is a vertex here, then maybe we need to go look at the fourth corner. We don't know. But Sanborn has said that he's curious why not much has been done visually with the piece by the people who are trying to solve it. Don't know what that means. All right, and this is just a close-up here. So again, we have a slab here, and here, and here. All right.
What the orientation of the piece itself, because it's like a sine wave, right?
The orientation of the piece itself like a sine wave. It's possible it's two parts of a cylinder that are taken apart. People have looked at it from up above, seeing that it's not exactly hemispheric. It's sort of like an ellipse shape going on. Some people have said it looks like a piece of paper coming out of a printer. One person said it looks like the Microsoft logo, and they've gone into all kinds of paranoid conspiracy theories there. We've looked at a lot of different systems having to do with that. These are pictures of the granite slabs here. This is the one north of the walkway, and this is the one south of the walkway. We have very, very few pictures. I mean, I'm considered to be one of the world's #1 experts on Kryptos, and I've only seen the thing once. So it's almost like we're trying to solve it by looking through this really, really narrow peephole and trying to see as much information as we can. These pictures were taken by Jim Galogly when he got a tour of, he was allowed to take pictures of the front area. Now, in between the granite slabs, we have these sheets of copper, and the sheets of copper are various Morse code messages. They say things like SOS, shadow forces, lucid memory, T is your position, virtually invisible, digital interpretatu. And some of the messages kind of disappear underneath the slabs. And a couple of these Morse code messages are also palindromes. Like if you take all the dashes and the dots, and they read a certain way, and then if you reverse it and you just change the space, and you can get the exact same message reading back the other way. Was this a coincidence or something deliberate? We don't know. Okay. There's also a compass rose. You can see it's carved here, and we have north, south, east, west. Now it is not orientated to actual north, and there's a needle that's carved on it, and it's not pointing to actual north either. Now whether it's supposed to point at something, we don't know. Okay. Now there is a lodestone here, sort of a magnetic piece, and it is a theme in some of Sanborn's other pieces. He has made 3 different pieces that have compass roses. One's in the Maryland area, one's in the Virginia area. And so we've done some things with maps like plotting all 3 of the compass roses and seeing where they point to see if maybe they're all intersecting. Haven't found anything interesting there. So it's possible it's just an indicator that he had a magnetism phase of his career, and this is a magnetism part of the sculpture. All right. I'm running a little low on time here, so I won't go into all details of these, but we knew that Kryptos was a key for part 1 and part 2, and we hadn't figured out a way that it was a key for part 3 until a member of our group did figure it out. The rectangle method that I came up with, we have these if you number, the S comes from row 1, the L from row 4, the O from row 7, and you get this key, 1473625, and someone figured out a way that Kryptos tied into that number. And the way is that if you take the letters of Kryptos and you alphabetize them, and then you number them 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and then you spell it again and scramble the numbers in the same way, you get 1473625. So this is not confirmed, but it's possible that Kryptos is a key for part 3 as well, which means that if it's for 1, 2, and 3, it's probably a key for part 4 as well. And this was the original formula that was used to solve this, going through and doing a modulus. There's another way of solving it, which is a double columnar transposition. All right. So we also have these letters that are out of alignment here. So there's kind of this group of 5 letters. The D is kind of mushed in, the R is mushed in, and we got the Y and the A and the R raised. This is from one of the rubbings that I did. When I showed this slide to Sanborn, he pointed at that and said, has anyone figured anything out about that? It's important. But we don't know what it means. Now one theory, and this is a new theory, is that there's a cryptographic system called rail fence or read fence, where you're actually writing things in a kind of a zigzag form. This is similar to a system that was used during the Civil War. So if you write meet you at the clock in this kind of up and down method, and then you take the rows, like if you take row 1, then 2, then 3, and then split those up into groups of 5, that would give you a ciphertext. That would be a way of encrypting something with rail fence. Now, there's I'm not sure I'm pronouncing this correctly, but read fence, if you take the rows in a different order. Instead of 1, 2, 3, suppose you did it in 3, 1, 2, then again you could get a completely different ciphertext. So it's possible that's what these up and down raised letters mean, is that we need to write it. Now it can't be exact because we know that K4 is not English. The letter distribution is not English. So it's probably a combination of a substitution and a transposition system, but we don't know. Something else was pointed out, all our transcripts were wrong. There was an L that we'd missed at the end of one row because it went E, F, G, H, I, A, and this should have been a J and then an L there. So that we had these two lines that both ended with L was an unusual thing. And it added an extra number to all of our counts. We'd originally thought that there was 869 characters, and then we add in the L. And if we add in those two reference spaces at the top and bottom, then all of a sudden we had 869 characters on each side of the sculpture. So again, something that looks like it might be significant might just be coincidence. I told you about the spelling errors. This is something else someone noticed, is that the Cyrillic projector, the keys to solve it were the words tien and medusa. And if you're looking at the Cyrillic projector while the light's on, you actually see the key, one of the keys, Medusa. It's actually beamed right onto the wall there. And it stands out because it's Latin letters surrounded by Cyrillic. Some of these letters don't appear in the Cyrillic alphabet. Now, someone went up and looked at it. The word Medusa on the sculpture is on this third row. And someone pointed out that there's an actual extra bolt that's potentially pointing out that row. And it doesn't show up really well here, but if you look from the inside of the sculpture, that bolt is really obvious, and it's the only bolt like that on the entire sculpture. So perhaps it's a direct clue, again, perhaps just coincidence, but if Sanborn did this kind of thing of putting a clue on the Cyrillic projector, it's possible that there's a visual clue somewhere on the CIA version of the sculpture. And that's, again, a reason that we haven't solved it, is maybe the fact that Kryptos was hand-carved. He didn't do this with a water jet cutting system like he did for Cyrillic projector. Maybe there's some letters that are like rougher and some that are smoother. So if you looked at the letters and went rough, rough, smooth, smooth, rough, 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 maybe there's a Morse code message. Maybe there's a binary system. Who knows? I told you about that. This is one of my pet theories, is that maybe if you take the S shape of the sculpture and you put the two halves together, you get a cylinder. And this is one of the earliest American forms of cryptography, designed by Thomas Jefferson, is actually still used by the American military within the last century. And perhaps this is the method that's going to be, we need to like shift the rows back and forth. And Sanborn, that was another thing he said to me. We were having dinner, and he said, how is it that no one's tried all the shifts yet? Don't know what that means. Something else was noticed about K4. We have KR, SO, and YPT. So again, we have all the letters of Kryptos that are all kind of close to each other on part 4. Coincidence? Don't know. Now, and this is an interesting statistical thing. If you take and you put everything into 7-letter rows and you line them up here, we have the doubled letter pairs. There's 6 doubled letter pairs in the entire batch. 5 of them are directly lined up in the exact same columns. Now, the chance that there would be 6 doubled letter pairs isn't particularly statistically significant, like 1 in 3. The chance that they would be all lined up like that, that's like a 1 in 1,000 chance. So it's interesting. And that it is 7-letter rows. And you know, Kryptos 7. If Kryptos is a key, again, this might be significant. This is Ed Scheidt. This is the man who taught Sanborn about cryptography. Now, he said that the last part of Kryptos would probably stand for 10 years before it was cracked, and that he did things to mask the English in part 4. He said he used a little bit of steganography, is what he said. Also, he said that we solved the first 3 parts without recovering the keys first. Now, I'm actually having dinner with Scheidt again tomorrow, so I'm going to be pumping him for more information. We'll see. When David Stein solved the first 3 parts, and he gave a talk about it at CIA, and at the end of the talk, Scheidt went up to David Stein and said, congratulations, you solved the first 3 parts, but not in the way they were intended to be solved. Don't know what that means. Okay. So how much was carved by hand? Oh, this is, again, probably coincidence, but it was amusing. Someone did some anagramming, and they took the words abscissa and palimpsest, and it comes out, you can make the phrase P.S. It's as simple as ABC. Okay. All right. Okay, now here's something else interesting. Scheidt, when I talked to him, was really interested in seeing me get access to CIA again. And I said, well, you know, it's really hard to get on site. And he said, well, I'd like to see you get in there again. And I'm like, okay, well, I'll try. And he said, well, if you can't, let me know. So I tried to get another talk, and I pulled all my strings, and all my strings broke, and it couldn't get back in. And so I went back to Scheidt and said, okay, I tried to get in, I couldn't. Can you do something? And I figured maybe he'd get me a speaking invite or something. Well, I didn't hear back from him right away, but about 2 hours after I sent the email, I get this IM pop up on my screen from this name Molly H. And it's one line. It says, "The key to Kryptos is Komitet." And I reply to them and don't get any reply, but they're obviously still online, and I'm checking profiles and doing everything I can. And then I send them another message, and they're gone. And I reach out kind of through my contacts, and I say, "Who's Molly H?" And the word I get back was it was an AOL screen name that was hacked, used to send the message to me, and then deleted. Okay. So now Komitet, I recognize it right off. It's the K in KGB, the Committee of State Security. Komitet Gosударственной Безопасности, I think. Now Molly H is also significant because the head of the Public Affairs Department at CIA is Molly Hale. If you write a letter to CIA and say, "Hey, can I have a tour?" and they send you a letter back saying, "No," it's going to be signed by Molly Hale. So, so that maybe Molly H has something to do with that. I think Molly's the one that sent me the message, but I think there was some sort of indication there. It's also interesting they said the key, not the key word, but the key. It's also interesting that Komitet is 7 letters. So maybe it's a clue, maybe it's not, maybe someone's just, again, yanking my chain. Now, here's that document. So again, we have the Komitet there. No, so a hint or a hoax. Well, what do we know? Whoever did send it, well, they knew I was working on Kryptos. That's not hard. You go to Google, you type in Kryptos, my name comes up. My site is even above the CIA website. So they knew I was working on Kryptos. Maybe they knew some CIA structure. I mean, this Molly Hale thing. They knew some crypto terminology. They knew to say key and not keyword. That says something. They knew some Cold War history. Most people don't know Komitet. If I went to all my hacker friends and I said, what do you know about Komitet? And they run to Google, they type Komitet, and they say it's the Finnish word for committee. People just don't know what Komitet means. So this person, they knew something about Cold War. They knew to send a 7-letter key, and no matter what else we know about them, we know they knew how to cover their tracks. So, all right. So getting towards the end here, we got Sanborn does have a bunch of other sculptures. This is similar to the sculpture that's at the Zola Spy restaurant. When Sanborn made Kryptos, they wanted him to give the answer, and he said he would give them the answer, but they had to give him something, and they gave him pulped, shredded documents. So at that time when the CIA was done with their documents, they would shred them, they'd mix them with a chemical, and they would make this kind of a popcorn kind of material. And they gave several hefty bags of that to Sanborn, and he found that if he knew that if he took it and continued to mix it, he could make this clay-like substance. And he made several of these pieces, which are called the covert operation fragments. There's about 24 of them scattered around the country. Some of them are in D.C. There's one at the Federal Reserve Art Board Gallery. There's some in Arizona, and I'm trying to track down all of them. We've cracked the codes on some of them, but not on all of them. Another thing we know about Sanborn is that he tends to repeat things. Like Adam Smith, he's got like 3 different sculptures that use quotes from Adam Smith. Other sculpture, he never made an encrypted sculpture before Kryptos. After Kryptos, he made several encrypted sculptures. All of the systems he used, it's always Visionaire, or binary, or Morse. But there's no new systems that are going in there. So chances are that whatever Scheidt taught him, that's what Sanborn has used in his other sculptures. And so we should know all the methods that he may have used. These are a few other pieces that he made. He had this whole thing where he was playing with light projection. He would go out into Arizona and he would beam light at a rock somewhere, and then he would do these time-lapse photographs. You can see the star trails here in the background. He has a whole series of pieces like that. This is from the Internal Revenue Center, a whole bunch of Social Security numbers out there on a bench. This is from University of Connecticut, and again, here's one of his binary pieces there. Now, I try and get all the information that I can about this, and sometimes I go to news agencies and they let me into their archives. And when I was in Washington, D.C. a couple months ago, CNN had just interviewed Sanborn for a piece. And when you see something in a segment, there's like, a 15-second or a 30-second soundbite. There's actually going to be like 2 hours of B-roll. And so they actually let me watch the B-roll transcript. And during the B-roll, Sanborn was walking around. This is the Antipodes sculpture, which is at the Hirshhorn Museum. And while Sanborn was walking around the sculpture, and he's showing David Ensor, and he's explaining to David Ensor about how codes work, and he says this thing about, and sometimes I use double matrices and triple matrices in order to develop a complicated system, and then went back to this table, and he's pointing, to do the ultimate. So it's possible that he just told us how K4 was done right there, and we just need to figure out what the exact keys are. We don't know. This is he did the art at the Zola Spy restaurant. This is a wall of classified documents, and these are all documents in English, Russian, and French. One of these documents is the source document for the Cyrillic projector. So if when Sanborn made this, he put the source for the Cyrillic projector into this restaurant, it's possible that one of these documents is also the source for Kryptos Part 4. There's other Kryptos references all around the restaurant. Okay. Okay, Kryptos and pop culture, real quick over the Da Vinci Code. On the back, in this kind of brown tear area, it says only WW knows. WW, by the way, is William Webster, who was the director of the CIA at the time that the sculpture was installed. Also on the back of the book, really faint here, light red on dark red, we have the latitude and longitude coordinates. Now, it's interesting that it says 37 degrees here, whereas in the actual sculpture it says 38 degrees. And I've asked Brown, I said, why is it different? And he says, the discrepancy is intentional. And I called up his publisher and I asked the same thing, and they said the discrepancy is intentional. So they have a very carefully worded answer that they're giving to this. Brown has not said if Kryptos is going to be in the next book, but he says it's definitely part of the theme. So that's what we know there. This was cute. This was a guy in my group who made a 3D model of Kryptos just so he could import it into a Half-Life engine to take a crowbar to it and shatter it into 1,000 pieces. Got a kick out of that. Okay. So, summary. Kryptos has 4 sections of code. 3 of the 4 have been solved. The 4th is one of the most famous unsolved codes in the world. After he made Kryptos, Sanborn made an untitled Kryptos piece with 2 sides. One side repeats the text of Kryptos over and over. The other side is encrypted Russian text. That's what we cracked. Both Sanborn and Scheidt have said it is solvable. We asked, is it just random text? They said, no, it's solvable. We're actually surprised it hasn't been solved yet. And people often ask me if I want to be the one to solve K4. I say, no, I don't have to be the one to solve it. I want to see it solved. So if I can help see it solved by increasing the visibility of the sculpture and shoveling information at people who are smarter than I am in order to get K4 solved, that's what I want it off my plate. I want someone to solve this thing. So anyone who wants to help, again, we want lots of different viewpoints, from the Kryptos scene. I want gardeners and doctors. I want as many different viewpoints as possible. I want to translate every sculpture that Sanborn's ever done, and he's done some really weird languages like Iroquois and Abyssinian. I want 3D modelers. If there's anyone here who has access to CIA who can go and measure things, because we want to make a really accurate 3D model, so we need to know which way does this thing point exactly. Is not just about a ½ inch. How many millimeters thick is the plate and things like that. So we could really use some help there. And also go look and see, is there a difference in how letters are carved? Are some rougher and smoother? This is one of the 3 models we came up with. It was done by a guy named Jay in St. Louis. So again, we're guessing at a lot of stuff here. For more information, we have a Yahoo group. Anyone who wants to join, Kryptos-subscribe at yahoogroups.com. Or you can go to my website, ilanka.com/Kryptos, or I'm on IAMS as Ilanka, or just go to Google, type in Kryptos. And I have to mention here, I do have a book coming out in April. There's a section in there on Kryptos, and I talk about all the different systems that are on Kryptos and how to solve them, what kind of cryptanalytic techniques that you can use. Any questions?
I was wondering, has Sanborn admitted that are the 4 sections basically all there is, or is there potentially more to it once you've got all 4 and there might be a 5th?
Okay, the question is, has Sanborn admitted that that's all there is, those 4 parts? Very adamantly, he has not. And he has said many times that even after part 4 is solved, that there is a further mystery to be solved. So it's potential that he buried something out there. He's mentioned several times that there's a reference to something he could have done at the agency. And I've actually got a video of Sanborn talking about this. It's from a CNN segment. Anybody wants to see it, I'll play it for you after the talk. No, he says that there's definitely a further puzzle after part 4. Any other questions? Yeah.
Are there good photos of the half-buried Morse code tablets? Because it looked to me, I got to see them. It looked to me like the DAs, or I guess you call them the dashes, are not all the same length, which is not normally what you would do in Morse code. Usually, a DA looks like
Every other DA.
Yeah, exactly. A dash of a particular length, and they're not different. But are there good photos of those out there?
The question was, are there good photos of the Morse code pieces? Because someone who says they've seen, and I'd like to talk to you after this, he says that, that he's looked at the dits and the das, and that some of the das, some of the dashes seem to be different lengths than the other dashes. We have very, very few pictures. We've got, I think, like one good picture of each, which was taken by Jim Galogly. I have contacted CIA multiple times, begging for other pictures. And they give me a standard responses, which is, you can use any picture that's on our website. And I say, there are no pictures on your website of the Morse code pieces. They say, well, you can use any picture on our website. And I've tried writing to my congressman, I've tried writing to the Senate, I've tried going to the National Endowment of the Arts, I've tried going through the GSA. I have tried everything I know of to get, I've tried, just going public and saying, it's public art, we paid for it, it's tax money, we have the right to see it. But so far, nothing I've done has worked. So if anyone here has any ideas on how I can get more pictures of those pieces, I would be very interested in talking to you. Sorry?
Freedom of Information Act.
No, we've tried it. We've written to them, and the thing is for Freedom of Information Act, you have to request a document that actually exists. You can't request photographs that don't exist yet. And but yeah, what we want to do is we want to get the documents that Sanborn used when he created it, because he said that he went to the CIA historical department and showed them the answer way back when. And he also, when he created the sculpture, he handed over an envelope that had the answers, and he handed it over to William Webster. So that document exists somewhere, but we've tried to find out where that document is, and nobody knows where the document is. But if we could find it, we would definitely be filing FOIA requests on it. Any other questions? Cheating? Rubber hose cryptography? Just go and beat it out of them? There's a saying about whenever a code comes out, there's a race to see if the brains can crack it before the spies can steal it, right? Sanborn has said that the current answer is in a safe deposit box. It's actually in 2 different locations. And what he's done is he's come up with something called the K4 test, which he's chosen 2 people that he knows personally, his girlfriend and a relative of his in Arizona. And he hasn't given them the answer, but he's given them the specific answers to certain of the letters, so that if Sanborn got hit by a truck, that someone could contact Jay or the other woman and say, okay, I know the answer, at which point Jay would say, okay, what is the 20th letter? What is the 37th letter? And if someone answered those questions correctly, then Jay would dig deeper and actually go and open the safe deposit box to confirm that it was an actual answer. Now, I've thought about doing something like maybe just going and coming up with a random answer and saying, is this it? Okay, is this it? Is this it? Kind of process of elimination. And 26 tries until I get the 20th letter, and then kind of gradually go from there. Yeah. Any other questions? There is a question that sometimes at this point about other famous unsolved codes. This is my list. I put Beale ciphers at the top, and then something called the Voynich manuscript. It's a few hundred years old. The Dorabella cipher, this was designed by Edgar Elgar. The composer Edgar Elgar wrote a simple encrypted message to a 23-year-old young woman, and to this day nobody knows what it says. The Zodiac Killer was a serial killer in California who wrote a bunch of letters. He was never caught, and some of the letters, encrypted letters, were never solved. And then Kryptos. And these are all I talk about all these in my book as well. All right, any other questions? Thank you all very much for coming. Physically, though, we definitely have some things with text where we tried overlaying things and looking for which letters are the same, and we found some interesting patterns.